All right, so continuing here, let's go back to our database handler. So like I said, we won't need most of this stuff here. So in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this because we're just going to have to pass everything ourselves anyway. I just wanted to add those things there for completion, really, because we're not going to need all of that, any of that, in fact. So for context, we're passing our context, the name. I'm just going to go ahead and get the name of our database handler, which, if you remember correctly, we added inside of our util class here. So we can go ahead and get one of our database handler names there. So how do we do that? Well, say util dot, look at that. Now we have access to all of this. Util database name as such, hit enter. There we go. So for a factory here, we don't need anything, but we need to pass something. So null works. And for database version, because you remember, we have our database version there. We created there. And you can see, because we use database name, it is now highlighted as that. That's very cool. And for version, I'm going to do the same thing, util dot database version, like that. Very good. So now we have our database handler. We're passing to our super so that it sets everything up for us, and life is good so far. Very good. So now that we have that set up, we need to go to the onCreate method. So this is where we actually create the database, because at this point, nothing has been created. We're just setting things up for us to be able to do something. So notice here on create, we pass the SQLite database object. That means now we have this handle here we can use to do things like creating database, updating if we need to, writing, deleting, all the things that we want to do. But the first thing, of course, we have to create our database. So here is indeed where we create our table, okay, because we have the database already, okay. Very good. So at this point here, we're going to use SQL language to write something or to write to our database. So what is SQL? You're going to see something like this, SQL. That stands for Structured Query Language. Okay, there's courses, there's books that have been written about structured query language. But the essence of a structured query language, SQL, is very simple, right? So that is a language that's used to query our database structure. So how do we do that? Well, because Android really doesn't have the actual language that we can write as we're doing here, we'll have to pass it all as a string. So I'm going to create here a string. I'm going to make this caps just to differentiate, of course. I'm going to say create underscore contact table, like that. So I'm going to pass a string here that will do that. Now with SQL language, what we usually do, again, you don't have to, but most times we tend to write all of the commands in uppercase just to make a differentiation, if you will. So I'm going to say create, right? Table, very nice. So this is now going to be read as a SQL command, create table. What is the name of the table we're going to be creating? Well, I'm going to say plus. This is concatenation, as you remember. Well, I'm going to say the table name is going to come from util dot table name. Okay, I'm going to say plus, and then I'm going to open parentheses. All right, when we open parentheses, I'm going to just concatenate here. Now we're going to pass the actual fields, if you will, the columns. So we're creating a table here, and then now we're going to go ahead and create the actual fields. These are the columns. So we're going to create ID, name, and phone number. So that is what we're doing. So we are structuring our database table. To do that, well, we will have to pass the actual, first of all, the key ID or the ID, this one here, right? So we come down here and we say util, again, dot key ID, like that. Okay, now we need to tell our structure here, our SQL structure, that what kind of key are we looking at? Well, we said that we want to make sure that each time a new item is added to our table, that we want to increment that key, right? That way, each item that is entered will have its own key. That is the whole idea, because if we have one key that points to two different items, that is a disaster, right? Because we don't want that. So the keys have to be unique and they have to increment themselves dynamically. So we need to tell via SQL, how to do that right after we added our key. To do that, we just say we want it to be, first of all, an integer. So you write integer, and then we want it to be a primary key and put comma there. So what we're saying here is that this is going to be an integer key. It's going to be a primary key. There we go. So at this point here, it will know, okay, this is very important, folks. It's not just any other key. It is a primary key. the main key that has to be differentiating each time that we add any new items, right? So now we've added our key ID here, we need to add name. We're going to do the same thing here. So after our comma here, because we're separating, this comma is separating between each of these columns, right? So we're going to say plus util again dot key name. Now what type of key that we are looking for here? Well, this is going to be a type text. So I'm going to say plus there because we're concatenating. So it's going to be TEXT. Put a comma there. New line. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to finalize and add our phone number. And we know that's also going to be a string or a text in SQL language. So I'm going to say util that key phone number. Concatenate here. It's going to be a text as well, like that. To finalize our command here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another plus here and finish with our parentheses there and put comma. Okay, so this may seem very complicated, but essentially what's happening here, let me go ahead and write it down here. So we are saying create table, and we gave our table name, right? And then we're saying, okay, in this table here, we are going to then add argument, if you will, like that. Okay, what are the things that are going to be inside of our table? Meaning, what are the columns names? Because we need those. Well, the first thing we want to do, we said we want to add an ID, which we added here, as you can see. Very good. And that ID is going to be a primary key because we said it's going to be an integer type of primary key. There we go. So it's going to increment also as we add things. And then we say, okay, we're going to add another column called name, which is going to be just text or string. Okay. For SQL, we have to say text, not string. And then we say we want also to have phone number. So that is what we're doing really internally. Okay, so we created a table, we gave a name, in this case was the table name, we decided it to be contacts, as you can see there, and we created the structure. So at this point, we have this structure here. Not quite, but at least we have this created here. All right, very good. Now, as you may presume, we're not done yet because we created our command here, create contact, but we need to run it. How do we run it so that the SQL database classes and everything else, the structure that is, will know to create our table? Because you have to imagine here, at this point here, when we run database handler, when we instantiate our database handler, say is equal to new database handler, this is going to happen. It's going to go ahead and say util database name and util database version is going to be passed along, which will allow us to actually create the database, okay? But then here on create, like we said, we're going to pass that database, assuming that it's already created inside of DB. So this DB object here knows how to do all sort of things, okay? That's what we're going to be using to actually create the table inside of our database. So how do we do that? Well, we come down here and say DB, because that's the object that we have, like I said here, and you say dot, look at all these methods that are available to us. All this amazing stuff, right? But we're interested in use the execute SQL there. You notice the execute SQL, it passes in, there's two methods, of course, at this point here. There's the execute SQL that just takes in a SQL string, which is what we just created. And there's another one that takes two things. So it doesn't matter which one you use. At this point, we're just going to use the first one, okay? Because we just created our SQL there. So database exec SQL, that will execute the SQL information or the SQL language that we created here to actually create what we wanted to create. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and create contact table and pass it along like that. So here, creating our table. That's it. That's what's happening there. So now every time we run this, we instantiate this, we're going to go ahead and then this will happen. It's going to go in and create our table for us. So looking at the on upgrade here, this is what's called internally when we somehow decide to upgrade our database. Now, to upgrade a database, we need to pass, of course, the old version and the new version, right? That's the idea. These versions are the things that we've added, or the thing, I should say, that I added here, okay? So anytime you want to come in and you want to update, you can change to second version and third and so forth. So changing this number means every time we create, it's going to go ahead and upgrade and do all sort of things. But at this point, it doesn't have anything, which means we have to pass in some code here. But what we really want to do here is to drop or delete the whole table altogether and just recreate it again. So that is what we want to do. So there's different codes you can add here, but that is what we are interested in doing now. So how do we do that? For that, I'm going to go ahead and say string drop table. And I'm going to just put our SQL that will go here. Say drop table if exists, like that. Okay, so that's what we're going to be using soon here. I could have taken this and put inside of our util, right? But that's fine since it's just going to be used here. That's totally fine. So now I'm going to take our DB object there, db.execute. Okay, I'm going to take the first one, and I'm going to pass our drop table, and then we're going to pass the actual table name. So I'm going to say util.database name. Now it's going to have a problem here because at this point here, we actually need to pass some sort of like object array inside of that. So I'm going to click here and say surround with array initialization. When you do that, then life is good. But it looks like we're having some problem here. I think it just wants us to extract this to a string. That's totally fine. I'm going to come here and say db drop, hit enter. So I'm going to say r.string, like that. And we can have another problem here. Bear with me. Let's wrap to a string like that. Okay, there we go. It just wanted us to always make sure that we put everything inside of these strings XML. That's totally fine. So we are making it so that we can get that value, make it a string and put it here. And then we call it like that. Okay. It used to be that you could just literally go ahead and put the util database name without having to put it as an object of string. But that's what they are wanting us to do now, because this will allow you to put more things to it if you want to put stuff, right? Like put something like that, okay? Because it's an array of strings, which is an object. All right, never mind. There we go. So we have our upgrade done and we should be good. Now, once this happens, we also have to do something else. We have to create a table again, because once we dropped, it's gone forever. So in this case here, we want to drop, but we also want to create a new one. So what do? We just call the onCreate and pass the DB again, like that. Okay, so this onCreate here, it's going to be this onCreate here, which we created earlier. All right, so that's it. The beauty about this code again is that once you create once, you just have to modify for whatever else you want in the future. So you don't have to rewrite the same code all over and over again. And that's the reason why we do it the way we do. We put inside of classes so that it's extensible. You can use it in other projects. You can implement it. You can extend it. You can do all sort of things. All right, there we go. So we are able to get our database handler here going. There's a few other things we're going to be able to do with it, but at least the basics of upgrading and creating our tables is pretty much done.